This next one is taken from the coming story, Caged In. Based on a true story about a fighter. Derek sat in his corner as his son, Derek Jr., took an ice pack and rubbed it up and down his dad's chest. Sitting on the other side of the cage was Kevin, the younger brother to the man that Derek's now ex-wife was having an affair with. Derek had been hiding the fact that he was fighting on both the underground and professional circuit again from his wife for some time, but seeing as how she was giving her attention to her affair partner, she did very little to pay him attention. Kevin, on the other hand, knew about Derek and his achievements in the cage. He also knew his brother was sleeping with Derek's wife. And so after Derek beat Kevin's brother down, Kevin publicly humiliated Derek by issuing a challenge to him and stating that both he and his brother were sleeping with his wife. This led to the current situation. Several rounds in and the two of them were fighting as if their very lives depended on it. The seconds weren't out yet. The next round hadn't started and yet Kevin was walking up to Derek. Derek gently pushed Junior aside and stood up from his stool as the two men looked each other in the eye. "Bare knuckles," Kevin said through his mouthguard. "Done," Derek said through his own. Kevin took a few steps back and turned around to head back to his corner and have his gloves cut off while Derek looked down at Junior. "Cut him off, Pop. That's against the rules," Junior protested as he stood up to look his dad in the eye. Derek's eyes held anger, contempt and determination in them. "Cut him off," Derek repeated before his eyes shifted toward Julia, his ex-wife. Derek stared for a while before Junior turned around and saw his stepmother just outside of the cage. Junior turned back around and began to cut the tape off of the grappler gloves Derek was wearing. "You can't do that," the ref hollered as he was watching Junior cut the gloves off of his father. "It's fine," Kevin yelled over to the ref. The ref looked at the owner of the fighting promotion who then waved it off. The ref shook his head and then returned to the center of the cage. Junior finished cutting the gloves off of his dad, but Derek's gaze had been fixated on his ex-wife. Julia shook her head slowly from side to side as Derek moved his wrists around and then flexed his fingers in and out of his palms. The freedom while still in a fight felt kind of weird, but he liked it. The next thing he knew, he heard the ref yelling, "Seconds out! Seconds out!" The ref called out. Derek turned around and saw Kevin with his hands free of his gloves as well. The both of them looked down at the other's hands and then let their gaze meet one another as they continued to glare. Both Kevin and Derek put their hands up as they took their fighting stances and made their way to the center of the cage. Kevin started things off with a quick jab, but Derek smacked it aside with his right hand. Kevin feinted with a jab, pulling his left arm back quickly just as Derek went to parry it. That was all the opening Kevin needed as he came with a fierce left hook to Derek's jaw. Derek stumbled to the side and Kevin pounced on Derek with a vengeance. Kevin wrapped his right arm around Derek's neck and locked the choke in with his left arm, securing a rear naked choke on Derek. Kevin pulled back on Derek's neck while straightening his posture. Derek grabbed at Kevin's arm with his left hand, trying to pull it away from his neck, but couldn't get any space between Kevin's arm and his own neck. Derek turned his head so that his chin was digging into the fold of Kevin's elbow and then started ramming his right elbow into Kevin's stomach over and over again. Kevin let go of his chokehold and placed his left hand over the area Derek had been striking with repeated elbows, but he left his right arm vulnerable. Derek took hold of it and then performed an over-the-shoulder throw. Kevin landed harshly on the mat before trying to get up as fast as he could. That proved ineffective as Derek slammed his right fist into Kevin's face, making Kevin hit the mat again. Derek felt the connection of his knuckles against Kevin's cheekbone and flexed his fingers in and out of his palm for a moment. Kevin stayed on the mat, gesturing with his hands for Derek to continue his attack. Derek just mimicked Kevin's gesture with his own hands and waited for Kevin to get up, even taking a few steps backwards to let him up. Kevin kept his eyes on Derek as he slowly got up off of the mat and then spit out a bit of blood before reclaiming his fighting stance. Derek retook his as well and the two of them inched closer to one another. Kevin went for another jab feint again, but this time Derek didn't deflect it. The both of them leaned to the left and hammered the other with a horrific hook to the body. Derek was hurt, but not as much as Kevin, due to the elbows to the body that he had taken just moments ago. Kevin stumbled a bit and Derek immediately took advantage and wrapped his hands around the back of Kevin's neck in a tie clinch. Derek instantly started throwing knees at Kevin's stomach. Kevin bent forward a bit and used his forearms to block the incoming strikes. Kevin quickly lowered his head a bit more and then shoved Derek away before retaliating with an uppercut. Derek's head snapped backwards and kept him stumbling back after that shove. Kevin took to the air and struck Derek with a Superman punch. Derek found his back hitting the cage and Kevin giving an evil grin. Kevin unleashed a barrage of punches as Derek did his best to shrink as he hunched a bit and tucked his head behind his forearms, using them as shields to take the brunt of the damage. Kevin was throwing a big left hand and that's when Derek saw his chance. After Kevin's fist slammed against Derek's forearm, Derek fired back with another left hook into Kevin's body. Derek could feel Kevin's body folding over onto his fist just before Kevin retreated, holding his side. Derek took to the air and attacked with a Superman punch, his knuckles slamming against Kevin's left cheekbone again. Derek pressed the attack, wrapping his left hand around the back of Kevin's neck and striking with an elbow to the bridge of Kevin's nose. Kevin's head snapped backwards as pain shot through his nose and all throughout his head just before blood started leaking out. Derek clasped his hands together around the back of Kevin's neck and pulled him in closer as he threw a vicious knee into Kevin's body. The pain from the repeated body shots forced Kevin to crumble to the mat. Derek knelt down and began to hammer away at Kevin's face, getting at least 3 shots in before the ref rushed in and pulled Derek off of Kevin. Derek stood there for a moment as rage was still washing over him. Kevin's cornerman had rushed inside of the cage and over to him as Derek glared at the beaten man while he lay on the mat. Kevin quite possibly had broken ribs, but Derek far from cared about any of that. The guy could drop dead right there for all Derek cared. The ref looked over at Derek and was iffy about taking hold of his wrist to declare him the victor. Derek's glare found itself placed upon the ref as Junior made his way into the cage. Junior placed his hand on his father's shoulder and felt the heat radiating from his skin. Derek turned around and looked his son in the eyes. Everyone present just saw the rage that Derek put on display, but Junior could see past all of that. He could see the hurt, the heartache that was catching up with his dad in that moment. He could clearly see the tears that Derek was fighting back. "Pop," was all that Junior said, and it brought Derek back to reality as he finally became aware of the ref and commentator in the cage next to him, talking to him. Derek looked down and saw a mic presented before him. Instead of answering a question he never heard, Derek simply walked off, out of the cage and started for the locker room. Everyone was a bit confused. Everyone except Julia. Derek was in the locker room, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall as tears were flowing from his eyes. Derek sniffed and wiped tears away before letting his arms rest on his knees while Junior sat next to him. Julia stood in the doorway not knowing what to say or even do at that point. Junior nudged his dad but didn't bother to say anything. "I know she's there," was all that Derek said as he didn't bother to even look in her direction. Julia took a few steps further into the locker room. "Derek, I never touched him," Julia said with a good degree of pain in her voice. "So how the hell did he know where my house was? How'd he know your number? When and where to find you?" Derek asked as he was steeling himself with rage again. His heart was more than crushed with everything that happened, just recently and in the past between them. As far as he was concerned, all of a sudden, she was sad about things. All of a sudden, she was sorry about her affair. "I don't know. His brother probably. I'm telling the truth. I never touched him," Julia said as tears began to well up in her eyes. "The brother that I caught you in bed with? That brother? The brother that you gave all of your attention to and never even suspected that I was fighting again because you were so caught up and in love with? The brother that got both you and him kicked out of my house ass naked? That guy? You gonna tell me you didn't touch him too?" Derek said with venom dripping from his every word while he still didn't bother to look in Julia's direction. You know I was sleeping with him. Julia said shyly as she moved to lean against the same row of lockers Derek and Junior were on. Right. I'm just supposed to believe anything you say at this point, right? I'm tired and it's been one helluva a night. Derek stated angrily as he somehow managed to force himself to stand. Junior stood up next to him before looking back and forth between his father and his stepmother. You shouldn't be in here. Other guys are gonna come in and start getting naked. Derek said and then waited a few seconds. Oh, wait. That might be exactly what you want. Whatever. Derek said and then started to limp his way over to the showers. All of the pain from the fight had started to set in as his adrenaline was declining. Julia rushed behind him and pressed her hands against his back. That was something that Derek always loved, and the feeling of her hands on his back used to bring a calming sensation to him. That was far from the case this time. He didn't have the anger in him to steel himself against her doing something like that. Her hands on his back felt good. She could feel the tension in his back increase instead of decrease though and knew her touch was having the opposite effect of what she wanted. Derek felt like his entire soul had just been crushed. His body felt like his heart had literally left, bursting out of his chest. The combination of physical and emotional pain was catching up with him. Up until then he had been drowning everything out with his rage and it kept him fueled up until then. Julia wrapped her arms around him and pressed her forehead against him.